Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
Today, we're talking about Google donating their agentic protocol A to the Linux Foundation, why everything wants to be your new IDE, the newest entrant to Look Who's AI native now, and an update to one of last week's biggest stories. Ben, you know the drill.
You know what? Let's just keep it simple and start right at the top because I love the Linux Foundation and I want to hear what's going on over there.
Yeah, so there was a recent announcement that Google donated the A protocol. That's the agent to agent protocol to the Linux Foundation. This was a formation actually of a project within the Linux Foundation, which is their typical approach to fostering an ecosystem of tools. And this is a project that they're working on together with AWS, Cisco, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, all of the big players, really. And while it'll be hosted on the Linux Foundation, it'll be seeded by Google's, uh, you know, background for having created the tool. Now, the A2A protocol, if you're not familiar, it's an open standard for communication and collaboration between distinct AI agents. You can think of it as like a language that allows agents to speak to one another, commit information back and forth, and it will be another critical step in orchestrating the AI agent platform of the future. So I'm interested to see what this means for development for A to A, how the stewardship might evolve as a community that's hosted in the Linux Foundation. I think it opens up a lot of doors for innovation here.
Yeah, I really love the Linux Foundation, as I mentioned. Like, I briefly worked there many years ago. I have a lot of friends over there. It's a great organization and, just truly just wonderful stewards for, like, neutral stewards for open source projects. And, I think the best testament to this is the fact that they got Microsoft to get on the good
Yeah.
side of open source software. Like, I'm never going to forget when I first saw Microsoft show up to a Linux Foundation event with all of their flying pig like swag,
Oh
because
yeah.
nobody believed that this company that previously called open source a cancer would show up in that way. So yeah, Linux Foundation's done a lot of great work, and I think if you're out there like wondering where is AI headed in the next like 5 years or 10 years maybe, like so looking a little further ahead than I think we typically are just because of how fast this technology is changing. But if you're looking ahead, I think this is where we're going to see the real productivity and the real fundamental changes happen from AI. So I think watch this project, watch what's going on here, because I think much like how HTTP created a lot of new opportunities via the internet, I think there's a similar potential here with A2A when it comes to agentic AI. So I think the potential impact here is pretty extraordinary, and the fact that it's now like a neutral organization within the Linux Foundation is paints a pretty bright picture for its future. So
Yeah.
speaking of Google, I guess we have a few AI updates that we wanted to talk about, and the first one I think is Gemini CLI. So what can you tell us about that, Andrew?
Yeah, so Gemini CLI just dropped in the last week. It's your open source AI agent from Google, backed by Gemini. And it's another entrant into the agentic coding tool space. These are tools that you can use in your CLI that allow you to interact directly with your tools. They are agent conversations that have tools and can operate on your system. So, you can use these types of tools in lots of different ways. Some folks use them in the IDE, like my daily driver is Cursor, but lately I've been actually trying out a lot of these coding agent tools in the CLI. I like to live there sometimes. I've had the luck with Claude Code and GitHub Copilot, so I'm definitely going to be checking out Gemini. I also recommend SourceGraph's AMP. All of them are really well-formed coding agents. Though I will say recently I've been using Goose probably the most in like one-off sessions with local AI. And I also use an MCP server with it. But I've been practicing on Goose because I'm actually going on the Great Goose Off later today. And this is an event that happens through Block, the company that created Goose. They have a YouTube vibe coding show where they bring folks together to try to build things on Goose on a YouTube live stream. So I'm going to be there probably right after this, actually. And if
Nice.
you miss it, be sure to go check it out on YouTube and see how I did. Let me know what you think. And most importantly, if you haven't tried out these tools, it's worth experimenting with this one from Gemini. The Gemini CLI's free tier has a high usage limit, and it's the highest in the market, actually. So it's a great way to try out agentic coding for the first time.
Yeah, it's just yet another company building more AI features to bring feature parity to the competitors. But I like how this does tie to our first story a little bit in that everything is sort of going to get an AI agent attached to it, and they're all going to be communicating with each other at some point. And the CLI makes a lot of sense because it's where developers spend a lot of their time. And yeah, if you're catching this live, make sure you tune into Andrew live right after this, or catch it on YouTube after the fact because I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. So I think we also have an update about a story we covered last week. So what's that, Andrew?
Oh, yeah. So we talked about how Meta was going after OpenAI's researchers. This was a alleged news article or a alleged thing that happened that we talked about in the news last week, of Mark Zuckerberg trying to take researchers from Sam Altman's company. And at this point, we might have to start a scoreboard because in the last week, we've learned about 3 such researchers that have taken that deal and have moved over to Meta in Zuckerberg's ever-growing quest to reinvent Meta's AI um, platform and initiative, its movement, right? It's doing this by trying to get as many experts as it can. And for how much these engineers and these researchers are getting paid, it's like big numbers, Ben. It reminds me of like big league sports in a lot of ways. Like at this point, I feel like we need like an ESPN channel on this. The signing bonuses make me think that all of these folks need like jerseys or baseball cards. Like I probably should have trading cards of all of these OpenAI researchers that I'm trading around, right? Like that's kind of how it starts to feel when you see some of the huge numbers that these folks are getting paid in these ever growing bids.
Yeah, it's funny. My kid actually just got his first pack of baseball cards yesterday, which is kind of funny on the timing
That
of
is
this.
funny.
But yeah, it does make me wonder, like, what does the rookie card look like for like one of these AI researchers? But
I know I'm definitely the Joker card, that's for sure.
yeah, but it's a great time to be a leading expert in AI, clearly. But our producer Adam brought up a really great point. Like, if you're a company that's worth like almost $2 trillion, like it's kind of a no-brainer to just spend like a couple hundred billion on this when the potential is like there to just completely disrupt the market. So like, if you have that much money, like what else are you gonna do with it other than spend it all on some AI initiative? But really my expectation is that like long term, this is going to sort of play out similar to the operating system market where you're going to have like a small number of competitors that dominate the space and all have their own sort of like unique take on it. Like, think about like the difference between Microsoft Windows versus like Apple's operating systems, and then like all of the stuff that's out there that's Linux based. Those are sort of the 3 areas that the OS market has sort of consolidated around. It wouldn't surprise me to see the AI market do something similar. And,
Yeah.
everyone's scrambling to be one of those 3. So it's definitely heating up.
Another AI news story, I think this is one of the last ones in our bunch here, an evolution of Airtable to becoming an AI native app. This is something that they announced last week. Airtable, as everyone knows, is a place where you can go store your data. It's a great way of working with rich, structured data, otherwise organizing things for your company and your team and your projects. But that makes it a perfect environment for tools like agentic AI that can look at that data and build experiences, tools, forms, and platforms that you can use on top of it. So Airtable announced a app building tool and app generator effectively called Omni. And this is something that allows folks to create interfaces for the data that they store on Airtable. And personally, myself, when I've experimented with these tools, they definitely fall in a different category from like the coding agents we talked about moments ago. This is kind of like a level higher up on the abstraction in terms of what they're creating for you. And I'm not totally bought in on their usefulness yet. I haven't had a lot of luck generating things from these kinds of apps that actually solved a problem for me that I felt like I could use over and over. I find the most luck actually in applying these things towards automation, like really bare bones, simple automation as opposed to apps. But I'm interested to try around with it. Try it out. I just haven't quite found my footing with these types of tools yet.
Yeah, and I mean, we've covered here in the past how like project management, planning, like that kind of stuff really hasn't had a lot of presence of AI yet. So when you think about the software delivery lifecycle, there's all these different stages. Like most of the tools that are out there help you with like coding and like understanding technical documentation and producing tests and documentation. The space that Airtable operates in, like that project management type tool, really has not been penetrated by AI yet. And I think there's a ton of potential there actually. And I love Airtable too. Like we've used it quite a bit. It can be a difficult tool to use at times because it's so complex, but the complexity also makes it really powerful as
Yeah.
well. And I actually think that they are pretty well positioned to be I've been waiting for an AI native project management tool. I think they are fairly well positioned to be a leader in that, just given how the way their platform is structured to help you build data sets that actually can then be used to train to feed into AI models, into workflows and stuff like that. Like I think there's a lot of potential there. So I'm definitely going to be checking it out at some point
Totally.
too. So yeah, and for this last story, I wanted to actually flip the script a little bit. This is something that I covered over on the Linear B blog, but it's some new research from Google, where they pulled together an experts or a group of AI-driven software engineering experts to sort of evaluate how AI is transforming software engineering, and really focusing on how there's this widening gap between people who are casual users or who aren't users at all and the people who are starting to master the full potential of AI. So they pulled together this group of, I think it was about 21 experts in software engineering, and they defined a set of 12 core goals for AI driven engineering excellence across the entire software development lifecycle. And this actually, one of the reasons I love this research is because it actually matches our own recent research where we took a look at, we counted 13 steps within the SDLC. And to look at where AI was being adopted, I just referenced this in a on the story about Airtable, and we'll have a link to the show in the show notes to this as well, so you can find it. But they brought together a group of developers who were self-described as being, or as AI being transformative to their practices. And they also indicated that they were using AI for use cases that haven't been documented in research or in literature, like novel, interesting use cases that are ahead of the curve. So these experts came together. They defined this group of 12 core goals for AI engineering. They also came up with a 6-step workflow that these experts were applying to every step within those 12 steps. And really, what they're trying to argue is that to get ready for the future, engineers are going to need T-shaped skills. Like, you've probably heard like a T-shaped person. I think a lot of people sort of strive to do that in many different parts of their professional lives. But at the essence of it is that you want to combine deep technical expertise with a broader knowledge and context of adjacent domains. So, and AI it will help developers do both of those things. So right now, this research says things like leaders need to help support junior engineers in particular, and invest in upskilling because they say that, when AI becomes commonplace, today's junior engineers will have to behave more like today's senior engineers. But then they also talk about how you need to embrace like expanded planning cycles. Like if AI is producing a lot of the hard work for you, that gives your developers more time to focus on higher order functions. And then also, like they mentioned, that soft skills are going to be really important too. Like there's going to potentially be a lot more collaboration that happens as a result of using AI. So, I think the whole point of this research is that like the people and the organizations and the teams who are systematically trying to master AI driven development are going to have a long term competitive advantage simply because they can make better decisions and move faster. And I love this research because and with how fast everything is changing, it's hard to keep up sometimes. Like we just covered a whole bunch of new features that are coming out, and there are plenty more that we haven't covered. This is something that can sort of help ground you and give you that long-term vision about where this technology is going and what we all need to be doing today to get prepared for it.
Yeah, it's great research, and I'm really glad we were able to cover it here and kind of go over what it means for the skill set that folks need. I really like how you called out that tomorrow's junior engineers will be expected to act like today's senior engineers. That's that decision manager upgrade that we all need to make. And the truth is that a lot of the folks that are coming in now in the software engineering world, I think that they're really well equipped to use these tools and to come in and have a huge amount of impact really early. The folks that I think that definitely have a lot of work, and I find myself in that group, is those who have been in their career for a little while, and all of the goalposts are about the shift. And so you need to be running, moving every day and learning new things. And this is a great call out of how all the new blocks are falling into place. So give it a read and figure out where your part plays in that SDLC of the future.
Yeah, I've been saying recently that we have the first generation of like AI native professionals hitting the market right now. Like people coming out of college that built AI practices into their work before they entered the professional market, and they're
Yeah,
just now these people are starting to hit the professional world. In 5 years, that type of person could be commonplace, and then the people who have been here for a while who haven't adapted to these new practices, it may suddenly look like they're in a completely new environment that they're not equipped for. So yeah, I
that's
think
right.
it's really important to consider those types of transitions. Yeah, so Andrew, tell us about our guest today.
Yeah, speaking of keeping up with new things, we all know about MCP at this point, but are you using it yet? Up next, I'm sitting down with the CTO and co founder of an AI native company to learn why they're building a first of its kind agency to deliver customized MCP servers. Check this one out. You're going to learn how the future's built. Hey everyone, joining us today is Andrew Hamilton, co founder and CTO of Layer, a company defining the frontier of agent accessible tooling. Today, we're diving into something that's going to be redefining how your products get used, whether you're ready for it or not. AI agents, they're not just helping developers anymore, they're becoming AI consumers with new protocols like MCP. And we've been discussing this a bit on Dev Interrupted. We had a recent chat with our guest, Sagar Bachu of Speakeasy, who dove into this topic about MCP and how they bridge into APIs. And that's why I'm really excited to have Andrew here today, a fellow Andrew, to continue informing us about how MCP is going to impact the work we do every day. Because when MCP is on the scene, if you're still building for humans, then you're missing half of or even more of your potential consumer base. It's a whole new wave of product adoption. So, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for welcoming me, Andrew. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes, this will be fun for our guests, a double Andrew day for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a lot of cool stuff to cover. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first one here. Um, we've been talking about MCP, the Model Context Protocol, about how it's enabling LLMs to consume APIs. Wow, that's a lot of acronyms. So Andrew, you're using MCP to build a whole new layer, no pun intended, for accessing tech on the internet. Why do you think MCP is so transformative of a shift in how products will be used and consumed?
So we've been in something that we call the LLM extensibility space for a long time now, probably year and a half. That's a relatively long time in the AI cycle of thing.
Yes.
And what we found is that everybody's tried to create this, may I call it an app store for LLMs, over and over and over again. The first iteration of it that I saw was ChatGPT with their GPTs. That unfortunately didn't go very well. There was, after that, GitHub Copilot tried something with Copilot extensions. There were a bunch of other attempts as well. I believe LangChain tried an extendability protocol as well. But MCP is that first attempt at really creating that app store for LLMs, basically enabling you to plug and play your own custom software with an existing application, or with an existing client application.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you move, consumption into this model, you're building MCPs servers that allow LLMs to make calls into someone's API. Then that kind of reevaluates how you have to package your products, right? Because now they're being consumed in a new way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a user experience shift. And so we've done this with a lot of companies now. We a bunch of different companies. Some of it, the MCP model fits really well with. Okay, they generally have really good iterative workflows. And so the user is aware of what they're asking, and then a change is made and you're able to see it really quickly. There's some companies where if you just map the API directly, it's not a very good or useful MCP server.
Right.
And so I've spent a great deal of time trying to differentiate what makes one product really good for MCP and what doesn't make, and what makes a product not good for MCP. And what I've found is that it comes down to the workflows of execution that a user on your platform experiences. A good example of an MCP server that I saw that I thought was pretty neat was Sentries. And what it's able to do is it can look at your code, tell you what errors came from the code, hit the API to update or get more information from Sentry, and then update code respectively. And so it's a quick, good iterative loop. And I think a lot of MCP is finding those types of loops.
So it's important to call out, I think, an important distinction you made about it's not just about one-to-one matching your API to an MCP server. It's about thinking about what are the actual flows that people are going to be trying to use your tools in that way. And you call out a good one of using Sentry. It's probably doing a combination of it's doing analysis of your code, right? Of its security, of its quality, and it's checking it against Sentry's own proprietary, information and APIs, and effectively MCP becomes a way of getting a bunch of really valuable context on demand into the conversation. So maybe that becomes a marker of a good candidate for MCP when it's really rich context, right?
Yeah, the rich context definitely plays a role. I can give you another great example. The one that I personally use the most is Docker.
Okay.
Very similar flow. So one of the first things that happens when I'm writing code is I'll take a bunch of the output of a Docker log, or take any errors that it throws me, and I'll throw it into ChatGPT immediately, or throw it into whatever service I'm using. And that's the first step. And so it just does that automatically, right? It's a tiny little optimization that benefits my workflow. And that's where MCP is kind of pushing the boundary. I have seen some poor uses for MCP servers.
Okay.
I don't want to mention any or call any specifically, but there's a lot where they do just directly map their API. Okay, it's like one-to-one.
Yeah, that's what
And
I've kind of seen. That's what people are
that's
seeing.
what
And so
I've
people get confused,
well,
right? About
not only
MCP must just be my API, and it becomes a bad starting place.
what's the point of MCP if it's just going to map your API? And I think that's a big problem that a lot of people are bumping into, is that oftentimes the best MCP servers use 3 or 4 API endpoints. Okay.
Mm.
But a lot of people map their entire API. So for example, Twilio maps 1,400 API endpoints. And that's a lot of endpoints for a model to handle. It's a lot of endpoints for a human to handle. And so, the utility you can get out of a one-to-one mapping just doesn't seem to be where MCP servers really shine.
It makes sense to me. It also kind of then is putting a lot of burden on the LLM, not only in its context, understanding this massive library of tools available to it, but then also to understanding how to connect them together, atomically, into oh, I'm going to build these few API calls to achieve this goal. When what you're calling out is that the MCP server should actually come to the LLM with that chain of API calls, or that specific layer of endpoints kind of prepackaged and ready, so that it's a more end-to-end experience, instead of it being a bunch of little it's not a bunch of Lego pieces, right? It's in fact just partially assembled pieces of what they want to build.
Yeah, I actually like the Lego pieces analogy a lot, right? And so you can you say you have a few blocks, and each of these blocks is a respective API endpoint function, or a local function, because we don't have to restrict ourselves to just APIs.
Yeah.
And either you can show the LLM, look, this is a common workflow that our users take, which is an assembled part of your little Lego creation, or you can give it the blocks completely on its own. Some things work phenomenal in the use case where you just give it whatever to do. Sometimes it's really intuitive and really, really good, really well thought out APIs. Oftentimes that works sufficiently. But more
Right.
complicated, bigger APIs where you have to do a lot of stuff, I think we see that workflowing, building larger initial chunks for the LLM is what allows it to give a better user experience.
That makes sense. And actually, this is starting to bridge into something that you and I have talked about a bit and that I'm seeing emerge as a new topic. And that's this idea of, we have the developer experience, very tried and true part of building any great product is having a delightful experience for your developers and your developer users to be able to interact with the technology you build. But it sounds to me like there's like a similar emerging concept for AI. And you could almost call it like an agent experience. And it's not just like a semantic differentiation. There's actually a lot that goes into thinking about how an LLM would use your API, just like what you called out in terms of what's available to it. So, um, have you all been exploring agent experience at Layer, and what has that looked like?
Yeah, I think a good place to start with that is why do we need agent experience, right?
Right.
So for example, I mean, this is a straw man, but why is it that you are interviewing me rather than an agent? Why am I even on the interview if an agent can handle it? And I think that highlights a really good glaring discrepancy between a developer experience, which is designed for a human being, and an agent experience, which is designed for an LLM. I think
Hmm.
early on in this, a lot of people had the expectation that agents were going to be just as autonomous as humans. And so far we've been pushing the boundaries and it's pretty impressive what we've been able to do. It's very, very impressive, but we haven't gotten that human level of autonomy needed yet in order to just essentially use the developer experience. I can't say to an agent, and I'm going to define agent in a little bit here so we are all kind of talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't just say to an agent, oh, onboard me onto this like AI platform. And so I think that's where the emergence of this term agent experience has come from so far.
Okay. And so maybe then do you want to define agent for us then, so we're all on the same
Yeah.
page with what that might look like?
Yeah. So when I'm gonna refer to agent here, I'm just meaning an LLM in a loop that has the ability to make decisions as to whether or not it continues working or it terminates. Pretty simple. It can call tools. It can do that basic kind of stuff. The cursor agent is probably the closest like implementation of that abstraction there.
Okay.
That I think we've seen this a lot in a lot of open source frameworks out there. There's a few that I'll call out. There's LangChain, which has an agent orchestration system. Crew AI. Uh, there is MCP Agent, which is one that popped up specifically
Yeah.
about. It was by like Last Mile AI. I think they built it. That's a good one. And so a lot of people are taking that initial, do everything agent and constraining it and allowing it to execute specific, very predictable workflows. And there's kind of a scale from a very weak workflow where you're not really giving the LLM very much direction, but you're giving it a ton of flexibility. So the LLM can do whatever it wants, to a very strict workflow where essentially it's not really doing anything more impressive than like clicking through a bunch of buttons. We almost call that RPA, robotic process automation. There's
Okay.
the company UiPath is responsible for something like that.
It's very like set flow. Like it does
Super,
this one thing and it's just equipped with the tools to do that one thing.
yeah. And
Okay.
so it's able to stuff like that. It's used like UiPath is used very, very frequently at big organizations to automate stuff like filing things or creating a bunch of highly easily automatable stuff. I think what we're seeing is RPA be pushed a little bit into the more autonomous direction, and that the agent experience lives right in between that, like what developers can handle, which is total autonomy, and
Right.
what RPA does on its own, which is a perfectly strict workflow. So what? Yeah.
Okay. So, um, in that world where you kind of have this agent experience between the full autonomy of the devs and between this like very rigid, like very formulaic approach to like automation. Most people would think of this as just like when you go and build a drag and drop automation or whatever for your business, your org, and then maybe now it has a little bit of LLM in it because that's very common these days. And so um from your perspective, since you spend all your days looking at how people are building and using these tools, what do you think that engineering leaders are still getting wrong about building or integrating their tools into things like MCP or otherwise?
Hard to say what they're getting wrong because there's so much experimentation in the space.
Yeah,
I think everybody is trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And everyone's trying to find that balance as to how strongly to strictify a given workflow.
do you think that this is sparking something that I've been thinking about is about how this starts to evolve for teams as they do experiment. Because you're rightfully calling out that, how can we know that anything that anyone's doing right now is truly wrong? We're in a early experimentation phase. I think the takeaway from that is the the only thing that you could really be getting wrong right now is doing nothing or turning up your nose at it or thinking that it's just going to pass because with every day like that, then you're missing out on opportunities that your competitors, other people in your industry are going to be taking advantage of. And that's just kind of the situation a lot of leaders I know find themselves in. And as that evolves, do you see taking these concerns like agent experience like more seriously to the point of it becoming like a first class concern for engineering organizations, like how we saw the evolution of DevOps and platform engineering teams to cater to the developer experience that's so critical for shipping good software? Do you think that a natural continuation of this might result in a similar team for the agent consumption of a product?
So yeah, I to generally to answer the question, yes. And my reasoning for this is, I think, pretty simple. It's their ChatGPT slash any agentic tools has billions and billions of users, I think a month. I think that they quote themselves at around 500 million weekly users.
Wow.
And Cursor has, another several million users. And this is just, I mean, at some point we're getting to like an eighth of the population is using these Gen AI tools. Okay. And
Right.
right now, these Gen AI tools are beautiful walled gardens. If you take a look at them, there's no ads. There's nothing really. It's like the good old days of
Right.
search, right? There's no advertising. There's nothing. But eventually, people are going to find out how to sell their products through these tools, through ChatGPT, through Claude, through these things. And so it's not so much that I think that existing enterprises will probably do all right for the next couple of years with their existing models, but where one enterprise goes beyond another is, are they able to figure out a way to tap into this user base? Like someone will figure out how to tap into this user base. I can't tell you who, right? But someone in every single one of those subsectors, right? In law, um in insurance, in whatever, is going to find a way to make money from the users on ChatGPT. I think that's where the majority of thought should really be allocated, is how do you harness this new semi-technical user base?
Right. And then how do you take your product and package it up and put it into their prompts to where now effectively you don't have to rely on them going to your website and being like, "Oh, I want to build with this," and signing up and getting the API key and doing all these things. Now there's an opportunity to kind of wrap all of this up in a MCP server that's just kind of available in tools like ChatGPT, yeah, to tap into that massive user base.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I wouldn't mind selling a $1 product to all of like ChatGPT's user base. I would be very happy to do that.
Right, that
Right.
opens up a whole new paradigm of, like, who's the gatekeeper for that? It makes me think of, like, Apple and the App Store, and, like, there's been rulings about, like, their charges that they can put on people that use it as a marketplace, right, to sell stuff. Apple gets a huge cut. So I think of, like, environments like OpenAI or with ChatGPT, like, do they create a marketplace? They had, like, the GPT marketplace, right? That was kinda like their first bit of kind of like letting people come in and build tools for their user base. So they've shown that their user base can be something that other companies could access. So maybe MCP is how people start getting their products in front of them.
I think you hit on something really good there, which was the App Store and Apple's notorious walled garden in the App Store. It's also they're really, yeah. If you look at all the court proceedings, they're really fighting to tooth and nail to keep that 30%
Exactly.
position on everything there. And I think that ChatGPT, Claude, or the people building these marketplaces are in a potentially similar position to
Hmm.
charge money on transactions similar to what the Apple App Store looked like, right? Prior to the Apple App Store, it was just a ton of users using iPhones, right?
So yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels there, right? With like the walled garden approach, with people having these massive user bases, and suddenly there's a chance for other companies to connect their tools, their products into that user base. And but also you touched on something that I hadn't really thought about before, that you're absolutely right. These beautiful walled gardens, you go in and there are no ads. It's not an ad laden experience, and you're not getting sold stuff. Like when you go and you search, and maybe I'm looking for, like, cool places to hike, and now Google's trying to sell me hiking boots everywhere. How long until you're having conversations and then the LLM is suggesting stuff based on other conversations where it knows what you're looking for, and it's like, "Hey, I know you've been planning that camping trip. Here's, some reservations you should look at. Here's, I know you like glamping, so here's the hotels by the park," and, that kinda stuff. But also it kinda scares me about this, like, almost, we talk about this, like, on social media, with how, eventually over time it gets worse. You get, like, this enshittification of any kind of tech space with, like, ads and just a poor user experience, and just, like, everything becoming about, like, the algorithm making sure that people can advertise on it. Like, people, there's a term for that, right? And on the internet, we call it, like, an enshittification of a platform, and it happens with every kind of golden platform. So maybe that's what will happen with LLMs, but, it's
We're in
definitely, if anything, a transformative opportunity. Do you think so?
I think we're in the golden days right now. I think this is as clean as it's gonna get. Everything is like so heavily venture backed. I mean, at some
I
point,
think you're so right.
they run out of like money to invest to some degree. And
Right,
that's
the goodwill only goes for so long until they're
yeah,
like, "Okay, we need to start getting some returns off of this."
exactly. And so I think that a VC subsidy tends to be when you get your golden ages, at least, in modern history. So
Yes, yes, that makes sense. And so, actually, this ties into another thing I've been thinking about with AI agents. I think you're maybe well suited to kind of inform us about, and this is about how it evolves as that user experience. There's I love that you draw these lines between ChatGPT's experience and like early Apple, and I think that there's also some parallels between like when we were building experiences for mobile on the web for the first time. You got this world where you had like the desktop website of a service, and then you had the mobile website of a service, and sometimes that was like a whole different domain. There was a whole period of time where we were going like the M dot whatever the website was to get its mobile version or whatnot, right? And then you see this convergence of, okay, now we have responsive design. Now it's all one website. It just works on whatever you view it in. And right now, I think that with LLMs, we're kind of in people are experimenting with a lot of different user experiences. It reminds me a lot of early mobile for web. But how do you view it? Do you think that there's going to be different lanes, like you go to ChatGPT to ask a question, but you work with an agent to do something else, or do you think eventually it's just going to be one experience?
I think it will fractionalize, if that is the correct.
Yeah, it would just become actually more lanes.
I think we're seeing that already because you have tools like Cursor, which are clearly, it's an IDE, it's a software development IDE. Windsurf, which no longer exists.
Yes, was just acquired very recently.
Was just acquired by OpenAI. Then who else? Yeah, and so each of these experiences is usually first an MCP client. So almost all of them support MCP, at least the big ones that we're talking about here. They all have their own unique experience, but generally Gen AI is part of that flow. And so I think we're going to see more Gen AI not necessarily embedded in existing products. Like, sure, there's some Gen AI in Google Docs, but I don't really use it. And I don't find it a very good experience. At least I personally haven't. I've heard of some people who do. I think instead we're going to see like a huge offshoot of highly specialized products with Gen AI embedded in them in very meaningful and very useful ways. That's where I think use cases are really going to shine.
Yeah, people shouldn't really think about necessarily. Maybe the winner isn't going to be who builds the Swiss Army knife that does everything. The winner is going to be the person who builds, the very specific tool that does, maybe one thing very well. And maybe that one thing it does very well is also then tied to something that's economic, right? You can charge for it. Suddenly becomes a tool people in that practice pay for. So it sounds like everyone's going to be getting very specialized tool belts full of, very specialized workflows and tools that they can use instead of maybe this like kind of like auspicious like genie in a bottle, one size fits all, you ask it and you get what you need kind of experience.
Yeah, I think Lovable is a really good example of one of those specialized tools. Really
Oh
good at
yeah.
building web applications.
Yeah.
It's good at prototyping those web applications. It's excellent at it. It's truly a magical experience to use something like that. And that is a very specialized tool because you can't use that to build all pieces of software that you want to build. It can't hit everything. But right, if I want to build a quick web app with Cursor, it takes more work. It's not as easy. It's not as one and done. And so I'm really, really fascinated. It's almost impossible for me to predict things about which tools are going to be the ones that people really love. But I feel like it's pretty easy for me to assume that we're going to see a lot across the spectrum from like highly non-technical prototyping type things all the way down to you need to be like a highly trained engineer in a particular space to understand this given.
Right. Highly specialized.
Yeah, highly specialized.
Yeah. So if we were to bottle up all of this advice and let's say for our listeners who are, they're on a software team and they're working on technology that maybe is getting consumed by an LLM, maybe isn't. What are some concrete things that an engineering org can start doing today to be ready for this kind of shift that you're describing?
I think MCP is I think conforming to model context protocol is probably the best thing you can do to somewhat future-proof yourself a little bit. So that means launching an MCP server for the most part, if you have an API service, and or integrating an MCP client into your existing application. And the reason I'm so bullish on MCP right now is because it's a protocol that seems to be able to handle a lot of use cases that have been being built in the last year or 2 years. So for example, if you build an MCP server and if you build it correctly, you can create a RAG chatbot out of that. So you've seen a lot of like chatbots for documentation, right? You can also have it build some form of like AI copilot where it can go off and execute really nice user starting flows. And so by building an MCP server, you're kind of building that frameworking block in order to, I would like to say, get your product ready for the agentic space. You can also conform to agent protocol, although I can't speak on that as well as I would like to because I haven't had the chance to read the protocol. I would, if I was going to allocate bandwidth, I'd say 90-10 is probably that, because with the MCP server, you get experimentation. And that's when you get to figure out if you're if you have one power user of your MCP server, you gotta ask yourself, like, oh, is this a new avenue that I'm gonna be exploring? And I think that's what engineers should be looking for, is power users of MCP servers, not necessarily like large amounts of usage.
Right.
Because yeah, that's adoption of these things is going to be challenging while you still need, fairly technical background in order to adopt them.
Yeah, there's so much you can learn from a power user right now. Everything we talk about, it's easy for us to feel like, we're in a bubble because, or that everyone thinks this way just because we talk about it so intently and so frequently. And in your user base, that manifests as power users, right? But we're still so early in the adoption, flow of LLMs that everyone's experimenting. Those power users are your most powerful experimenters, and like you should be learning from them. I think is a great takeaway for how teams can getting started. So like if you haven't started working or experimenting with LLMs or with MCP specifically, you should look at your current users of your tooling, of your APIs, of the things that you would be interested in packaging into an MCP server, and learn those workflows they use, right? Because if you build those workflows into the MCP server, now you kind of have some velocity and you've justified what you just built. So it sounds like you have to start by understanding your core power users first.
That would be my suggestion. For MCP in particular, they also just have an SDK for almost every language that you want to build it
Yeah,
in. And so it's just a really, really nice, easy framework to build on top of. Like an
it
MCP,
is.
you really should be able to put something like that together in 3-4 days. If like one engineer should be able to handle that in 3-4 days. And by the way, when we speak to people, usually that's what we hear, is that it's a 3 to 4 day initiative, and then it's a 2 to 3 day marketing initiative to at least get something out there and to try it out. And I think that's why we saw an immense amount of MCP hype last month. I mean, last month was, I think we definitely hit the
Well,
peak.
relative, for
Yes,
our listeners for sure. But very recently in the times, there was like a big push, right? Where just like how you're saying, like there were like, I feel like everyone was like dropping an MCP server, right?
everyone was dropping one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was cool. It's like it's easy to build. Like you're so right that it just takes like a day or two or like a few to really kind of get up and going with a prototype. There's also a lot of really great like techniques that you can kind of use to rapidly prototype them as well. And so I think that's a good call out that you should start experimenting. That the lift is low. Basically, you should come in the waters and just try it out because it's not a heavy investment to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I would
and
definitely
and
suggest that.
in a company like yours, we don't get a lot of opportunities to talk with like AI native companies and startups because one, they're new. Two, they're all in stealth mode right now, building, like maniacs, and they're not coming up for water or to talk with people right now as much. And the ones that are, they're like yourself. They're kind of informing people how they need to get ahead of the curve of the adoption. And this is really great because it's an opportunity for everyone to learn about like the new organizational footprint of organizations popping up right now. And I wanted to ask you, Andrew, in our chat, what makes an AI native company like yours different from per se like a digital native company?
It's a good question. It's a good parallel of those two terms, may I just say.
Because when I think of like a digital native, there's a million things I can think of that makes them different from a traditional business, a traditional enterprise, as we call them, whatever the case. Those businesses of yore, they have a different footprint, right? They move at different speed. They have huge middle management layers. They often have very archaic adoptions or usages of technology. Some of them still have a bunch of servers in a basement somewhere. Like they have very different kind of um, ways of life, right? And then you get digital natives like the SaaS companies of the world. A lot of them are more, they're remote, they're more distributed, they're often smaller, they're using new tech, and Like their product output loops are very different. But then you get like an AI native startup like yours, and it's very small, right? Like often a team of like one, two, three people. But I think that's kind of maybe underselling the impact of what y'all are able to do with the hands that you have available because you're building a company from scratch with like when there's a whole new suite of tools available. Like, and maybe is that a differentiator y'all feel? Is that you're like so equipped by tools, or do they get in the way? Like, what's it really like in the trenches?
Fascinating. It's a great question. Um, so speed of iteration is quick. Like it's really, really fast. Uh, and you'll see something, you'll have an idea and it will have been built a day before because of the amount of stuff that's shipped in the space. But humans have like a very specific bandwidth. And so most of those projects are abandoned very early on in their life cycle. And an example I'll give you, one that we personally work on all the time now, and is something we do consistently, is there's a specification out there called OpenAPI specification. It's basically
Yeah.
a standard protocol that uh, I'm sure most of your listeners are aware of, but uh, it's a standard protocol for describing an API. And one of the first ideas I had when OpenAPI, this was like a day or two after the MCP launch, I was like, oh, I'm going to do an OpenAPI to MCP, like server creator. And within, I think 24, 48 hours, one had been built. One had been built using almost entirely AI.
Right.
The thing is like most AI products, that one was abandoned. And then I saw another one pop up. That one was abandoned. And so you see a lot of these like really quick ideas, quick testing and iterating and moving on. And it gives this semblance that the industry is moving really, really, really quickly, when in reality, it's still trying to perfect a lot of, honestly, some of the really basic stuff. For example,
Right.
an API to MCP, you would think would be solved by now. You would think, oh, that's done. But
Right.
it's not. I've seen 100 projects of it. I've seen 100 like different versions of it, and they're all like, okay, is what I've seen. And the ones that, most of them aren't maintained. So I think that an AI native company, right, does its best to try and figure out what parts of itself it can optimize away with current, AI utility. So for example, if I don't want to generate project proposals, I can template them and customize them very easily for specific stuff. So I can automate that basic grunt work. Now, a more traditional company, I'm sorry, it was a digital native, the term you used? Yeah,
Yeah.
digital.
Digital native, I think, is
A
what we
digital
would
native
say.
company has processes like that, which are already embedded in the company's overall in the company's overall function.
Right.
And I think you can become an AI native company by trying to look at those somewhat automatable workflows and trying to shove AI into them and seeing if it works or not. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you'll find out that the quality of something that you're producing plummets, right? In which case it's not a good use case. But in other cases, you're freeing up a lot of your employees to do stuff that is, a much more human task, something that AI just can't handle quite yet.
Right.
So I think that I think that's what differentiates the digital native from the AI native. It's that we get to start off building our workflows, like having
Right.
this tool. They didn't get to start off having like somewhat autonomous agents to be able to build their companies.
Andrew, this has been a super incredible conversation, and it's been great to have your insights here. I think you gave our listeners a lot of actionable takeaways, and you kind of painted a picture about how AI is going to evolve. We talked a bit about like walled gardens and how they're going to change and the opportunities presented for engineering teams right now. So, if you're an engineer and you're on a team that potentially could have impact for MCP, I think this is your invitation, your call to action to go experiment because the lift to get an initial idea going is so low. and that it's really effective to just start brainstorming now about how your teams can use MCP, whether internally to go faster, better at building software, or externally to give your developer users superpowers. I think there's a lot to gain here. And before we wrap up, Andrew, where can our audience go to learn more about Layer and the work you're doing?
Uh, I think we'll link our website. I think that would probably be the best place
Perfect.
for people to
Yeah,
learn. Yeah.
we'll share the Layer website so y'all can go check it out. And obviously we'll be staying in touch and following the story on socials as well. And so to you, our listener, if you've made it this far, then you clearly liked what we chatted about today, nerding out about all things MCP. I think it's a cool conversation that we're going to continue, but I would love to hear what you think about it. So be sure to subscribe and share the episode and check out our Substack, drop a comment, let us know what you think. And Andrew and I are both on LinkedIn. It's really easy to get a hold of both of us. In fact, you can probably just type Andrew into the search bar and we might even both be there. So you should definitely reach out to us, drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you about what you're experimenting with. And thanks for joining us for Dev Interrupted. We'll see you next time.